Okay, so, hi, welcome back to another creepypasta story video. Today, creepypasta I'm going to bring is called Abandoned by Disney, but before I get into it, I do want to say a few things. First off, the video is one take, so if you do hear me stumble, mumble, fumble, mess with my words, I'm sorry, this is a one take. And second thing, I do want to say, please consider using code GOONS at gamersubs.gg. It's code GOONS, and you can use that to get 10% off at checkout. And also, the day that this video is going live is Halloween, so if you do celebrate Halloween, I hope you have a happy Halloween. But if you don't, I hope you have a good October 31st, and some parts of the world a good November 1st. But outside that, let's get into it. This creepypasta is called Abandoned by Disney. Some of you may have heard that Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real-life ghost town. Disney built the Treasure Island Resort in Baker's Bay in the Bahamas. It didn't start as a ghost town. Disney cruise ships would actually stop at the resort and leave tourists there to relax in luxury. This is a fact. You can look it up for yourself. Disney ended up blowing $30 million on the place. You heard that right. $30 million. Then they just abandoned it. Disney blamed the shallow waters, and the waters were too shallow for their ships to safely operate. And there was blame casted onto the workers, saying that since they were from the Bahamas, they were too lazy to work a regular schedule. That's where the factual nature of the story ends. It wasn't because of the sand, and it obviously wasn't because foreigners are lazy. Both are convenient excuses. No, I sincerely doubt that those reasons were legitimate. Why do I buy the official story? Because of Mowgli's palace. Near the beachside of Emerald Isle in North Carolina, Disney began construction of Mowgli's palace in the late 1990s. The concept was a jungle-themed resort with a large, you guessed it, palace in the center of the whole thing. If you are unfamiliar with the character of Mowgli, then you might better remember the story Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it anywhere else, you know it's a Disney cartoon from decades past. Mowgli is an abandoned child in the jungle, essentially raised by animals and simultaneously threatened/pursued by other animals. Mowgli's palace was a controversial undertaking from the start. Disney bought up a ton of high-priced land for the project, and there was actually a scandal surrounding some of the purchases. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's houses, then turned around and sold the properties to Disney. At one point, a home that had just been constructed was immediately condemned with little to no explanation. The land that was grabbed by the government was supposedly for some fictional highway project. Knowing full well what was going on, people started calling it the Mickey Mouse Highway. Then there was a concept art. A group of stuffed shirts from Disney Co. actually held a city meeting. They intended to sell everyone on how lucrative this project was going to be for everyone. When they showed the concept art, this gigantic Indian palace, surrounded by jungle, staffed with men and women in loincloths and tribal gear, well, suffice to say, everyone flipped their shit. We're talking about a large Indian palace, jungle, and loincloths, not only in the center of a relatively wealthy area, but also somewhat xenophobic area of the southern USA. It was a questionable mix at that point in history. One member of the crowd tried to storm the stage, but he was quickly subdued by security after he managed to break one of the presentation boards over his knee. Disney took that to community and essentially broke it over his knee. As well, the houses were razed, the land was cleared, and there wasn't a damned thing anyone could do or say about it. Local TV and newspapers were against the resort at the beginning, but some insane connections between Disney's media holdings and local venues came into play, and their opinions turned on a dime. So, anyway, Treasure Island, the Bahamas. Disney sunk those millions in and then split. The same thing happened with Mowgli's palace. Construction was complete. Visitors actually stayed at the resort. The surrounding communities were flooded with traffic and the usual annoyances associated with an influx of lost and irate tourists. Then it all just stopped. Disney shut it down and nobody knew what the hell to think. But they were pretty happy about it. Disney's loss was pretty hilarious and wonderful to a large group of folks who didn't want this place here. I honestly didn't give the place another thought since hearing it closed over a decade ago. I live maybe 4 hours from Emerald Isle, so really only heard the rumblings and didn't experience any of it firsthand. Then I read an article from someone who had explored the Treasure Island Resort and posted a whole blog about all the crazy shit he found there. Stuff that was just left behind. Things that were smashed, defaced, probably ruined by disgruntled former employees who had lost their jobs. Hell, the locals from all around the place had a hand in wrecking the place. People there just felt angry about Treasure Island, as folks here did about Mowgli's palace. Plus, there was rumors that Disney had released their aquarium stock into the local waters when they closed, including sharks. Who wouldn't want to take a few swings at some merchandise after that? Well, what I'm getting at is the blog about Treasure Island got me thinking. Even though many years have passed since its closing, I figured it might be cool to do some urban exploration at Mowgli's palace. Go in there to take some photos, maybe even write about my experience, and probably see if there's anything I could take home as a memento. I'm not going to say I wasted no time getting there, because honestly, it took me another year after I first found that Treasure Island article to get around to going up to Emerald Isle. Over the course of that year, I did a lot of research on the Palace Resort, or rather, I tried to. Naturally, no official Disney site or resource made any mention of the place. That had been scrubbed clean, and even odder. However was that nobody before myself had apparently thought to blog about the place or even post a photo. None of the local TV or newspaper sites had one word about the place. Though that was to be expected since they had all swung Disney's way. They would be out here lauding their embarrassment, you know. Recently, I learned that corporations can actually ask Google, for example, to remove links from the search results. Basically for no good reason, and looking back, it's probably not that nobody spoke of the resort, but rather the words were made inaccessible. So in the end, I could barely find the place. All I had to go on was an old as hell map I received in the mail back in the 90s. It was a promotional item sent out to people who had recently been to Disney World. And I guess since I'd been there in the late 80s, that was recent. I didn't really tend to hang on to it. It just got shoved in with my books and comics from my childhood. I only remember it months into my research, and even then it took me another few weeks to locate the storage bin my parents had shoved it all into. But I did find it. Locals were no help, and most were transplants who had moved to the beach in recent years, or any old resident who just sneered at me and made rude gestures the second I managed to say, "Where would I find Mowgli's?" The drive took me through an inordinately long corridor of overgrowth. Tropical plants that run rampant and overpopulated the area mixed with the native species of flora that actually belonged there and had tried to reclaim the land. I was in awe when I reached the front gates of the resort. It was tremendous, monolithic wooden gates whose supports to either side looked like they must have been cut from giant sequoias. The gate itself had been gouged in several places by woodpeckers and eaten away by the base by burrowing insects. Hanging on the gate was a sheet of metal, with some random scrap, with hand-painted letters scrawled in black. Abandoned by Disney. Clearly the handiwork of some past local or an employee who wanted to make some small protest. The gates were open enough to walk through, but not drive. So grabbing my digital camera and the map, whose flip side showed a layout of the resort, I set off on foot. The inner grounds of the place was just as overgrown as the entryway. Palm trees stood unattended and ragged among piles of their own coconuts. Banana plants similarly stood in their own stinking, bug-riddled refuse. There was a sort of clash between order and chaos, and carefully planted rows of perennial flowers mixed with obnoxious tall weeds and stinking, blackened mushrooms. All that remained of any outdoor structures were broken, rotting wood and various charred bits of unidentifiable material. It was most likely an information booth or an outdoor bar, which was now simply a pile of assorted debris chopped up by past vandalism and ravaged by weather. The most interesting thing on the grounds was a statue of Baloo, the friendly bear from the Jungle Book, which stood in a sort of courtyard in front of the main building. He was frozen in a jovial wave towards no one, staring into the empty space with a silly, toothy grin, as bird shit covered whole swaths of his fur, and vines ensnared his platform. I approached the main building, which was the palace, only to find the outside of the building covered in graffiti where the original paint hadn't peeled or chipped away. The front doors weren't just open, but they had been taken off their hinges and were stolen. Above the front door and gaping maw where they had been, someone had once again painted, "Abandoned by Disney." I wish I could tell you about all the awesome stuff I saw inside the palace. Maybe forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, a full-fledged secret society of homeless bums, but no. The inside of the building was so stark, so bare, that I actually think people had stolen the molding off the walls. Anything that was too big to steal, counters, desks, and giant fake trees, they're all resting amid this empty echo chamber that amplified my every step, like a slow rat-a-tat of a machine gun. I checked the floor plan and headed to all locations that might seem in any way interesting. The kitchen was, as you imagine, an industrial food prep area with appliances and space. No expenses spared, every glass surface was broken, every door knocked off of its hinges, every metal surface kicked and dented. The entire place smelled like very old piss. The huge freezer, not even remotely cool now, had row upon row of empty shelf space. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably for hanging cuts of meat, and as I stood inside for a moment, I noticed that they were swinging. Each hook swung in a random direction, but the movements were slow and small that it was almost impossible to see. I figured it had been caused by my footsteps, so I stopped one from swinging by clutching it in my fist, then carefully letting it go. But within seconds, it started to swing once more. The bathrooms were in much more the same state as the rest of the place. Just like the Treasure Island Resort, someone had methodically smashed each porcelain commode with coconuts and other implements. There was about half an inch of rancid, stinking, stagnant water on the floor, so I didn't stay there very long. But what's odd is that the toilets and sinks and the bidets in the ladies' room, yes, I went in there, they all dripped, leaked, or just ran freely. It seemed to me that they should have just shut the water off long ago. There were plenty of rooms in the resort, but naturally I didn't have time to look through them all. The few I did peer into were similarly wrecked. I didn't expect to find anything there. I thought there was actually a television or radio in one room, as I think I heard a quiet conversation coming out. Though it was like a whisper. Probably my own breathing echoing in the silence, or just another case of sound of flowing water playing tricks in my mind. This is what it sounded like to me. The first person. I didn't believe it. The second person replied, a short, unknown reply. The first one. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. The second person said, your father told you. The first person replied, unintelligible, or possibly just weeping. I know, this sounds ridiculous, but I'm just telling you what I experienced. Why I thought there might have been something running in that room, or were some vagrants who holed up there and probably would have knifed me. At the front doors of the palace again, I figured I hadn't found anything of note, and I wasted the trip up. As I looked out the door, I noticed something interesting in the courtyard that I apparently missed. Something that would at least give me one thing to show for all my trouble, even if it was just a photograph. There was this lifelike statue of a python maybe 80 feet long, coiled up and sunning itself on a pedestal, right in the center of the area. It was almost time for the sun to start setting, so the light fell onto the object in the perfect way for a photograph. I approached the python and I snapped a photo. Then I stood on my toes and snapped another. I moved closer again to get the details of his face. Slowly, casually, the python lifted its head, looked directly into my eyes, turned and slithered off the pedestal, across the grass and into the trees. All 80 feet of it, Its head long disappeared into the woods before its tail even left the sunning spot. Disney had released all of their exotic animals onto the grounds. Right there on my floor plan map was the reptile house. I should have known. I read about the sharks. I read about the sharks at Treasure Isle, and I should have known that they'd done this. I was dumbfounded, just utterly stupefied. My mouth must have been hanging open for the longest time before I came back down to earth, and I snapped it shut. I blinked a few times and backed away from where the snake had been. I walked back towards the palace. Even though it was totally gone, I still wasn't taking any chances and backed my way into the building. I took a few deep breaths and slapped my own face to get myself right in the head again. I looked for a place to sit down as my legs were feeling a bit like jelly at this point. Of course, there was no place to sit down unless I wanted to recline on the broken glass and dead leaf carpet or haul myself up onto a desk of questionable reliability. I had seen some stairs near the palace lobby and decided to go have a seat there until I felt better. The staircase was far enough away from the front of the building to be relatively clean, save for the startling accumulation of dust. I pulled a wedge of metal off the wall and once again painted with the words "Abandoned by Disney." It was a motto I had become accustomed to. I placed the wedge on the stairs and sat on it to keep at least somewhat clean. The stairway led downward below ground level. Using the flash of my camera as a sort of improvised flashlight, I can see that the staircase ended in a metal mesh door with a padlock. The sign on the door read, "Mascots only, thank you." This perked up my spirits a little bit for two reasons. One, a mascot only area will have definitely had some interesting stuff to look at back in the day. And two, the padlocks was still in place. Nobody had ever gone down here. Not the vandals, not the looters, nobody. There was this one place I could actually explore and perhaps find something interesting to photograph or steal anything. To photograph or what to only steal. I had come to a place essentially agreeing with myself that it was okay to take anything I wanted because, hey, it was abandoned. It didn't take much to bust the lock. Well, actually, that's wrong. It didn't take much to bust the metal plate on the wall that the padlock was hooked to. Time and decay had done most of the work for me, and I was able to bend the metal plate enough to pull the screws out of the wall. Something nobody else had apparently thought of, or hadn't been able to do at this time. The mascot-only area was a startling and very welcome change from the rest of the building I had seen. For one, every second or third fluorescent light bulb overhead was illuminated, even though they flickered and faded randomly. Also, nothing had been stolen or broken, even if age and exposure were indefinitely taking their toll. Tables had notes and pens, and there were clocks. Even a punching clock on the wall completely filled out with a time card. Chairs were scattered around, and there was even a small break room with an old, static-filled television and long rotted-out food and drink on the counters. It was like one of those post-apocalyptic movies where everything is left in a state of evacuation. As I walked the maze-like sub-basement hallways of the mascot-only area, the sights only became more and more interesting. As I went further, desks and tables were knocked over, papers were scattered, and almost melted with damp floor. And a large carpet of mold was slowly overtaking the real rotting crimson floor covering. Everything was just a sort of squishy. Anything would disintegrate into mush when I applied even the least amount of force. And clothing items hanging on hooks in one of the rooms simply fell to moist threads if I tried to unhook them. One thing that annoyed me was the light was becoming more sparse and unreliable. As I went further into the dank, suffocating depths of the place. Eventually, I reached a black and yellow striped door with the words "Character Prep 1" stenciled on it. At first, the door wouldn't open. I figured that there was probably where the costumes were kept, and I definitely wanted a photograph of that twisted, stinky mess. Try as I might, whatever angle or trick I tried, the door wouldn't budge. That is until I gave up and started to walk away. Then there was just a slight popping sound and the door creaked open slowly. Inside, the room was completely dark. It was just pure pitch black and pure darkness. I used the camera flash to look for a light switch in the wall. I used my camera's flash to look for a light switch on the wall by the door, but there was nothing there. As I made my search, I was jarred out of my sense of excitement by a loud electrical buzz. Rows of light overhead suddenly flashed to life, flickering and fading in and out like the rest I had passed. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and it seemed like the light was going to just keep getting brighter until all the bulbs exploded. But just when I thought it would reach that critical stage, the lights dimmed a bit and steadied. The room was exactly as I had pictured it. Various Disney costumes hung on the walls, fully put together like strange cartoon cadavers hung from invisible nooses. There was an entire rack of loincloths and native clothes on hangers towards the back. What I found odd, and what I wanted to photograph right away, was a Mickey Mouse costume in the center of the room. Unlike the other costumes, it was lying on his back in the center of the floor like a murder victim. The fur on the costume was rotten and shedding, creating bare patches. What was even odder, however, was the coloring of the costume. It was like a photo negative of the actual Mickey Mouse. Black where he should be white, and white where he should be black. His normal red overalls were light blue. The sight was off-putting enough that I actually put off photographing the thing until last. I took a picture of the costumes hanging on the walls, all upward angles, downward angles, side shots to show an entire row of frozen, putrid cartoon faces. Some of the masks had the plastic eyes missing. Then I decided to stage a shot. Just one of the bed-raggled characters' heads on the slick, grimy floor. I reached down for the headpiece of Donald Duck costume and I carefully removed it so the thing wouldn't fall apart in my hands. As I looked into the face of the wide-eyed, moldering head, a loud clattering sound made me jump with fright. I looked down at my feet, and there between my shoes was a human skull. It had fallen out of the mascot head and shattered into pieces at my feet. Only the empty face and lower jaw remained, staring up at me. I dropped the Donald Duck head immediately and, as you expect, I moved for the door. As I stood in the doorway, I looked back to the skull on the floor. I had to take a picture of it, I had to, for any number of reasons that may seem silly, but only if you don't think it through. I need proof of what happened, especially if Disney was going to somehow make this go away. I had no doubt in my mind, right from the start, that even if it was just gross negligence, Disney was responsible for this. That's when Mickey, the photo negative opposite Mickey, in the middle of the floor, started to get up. First sitting up, then climbing to his feet, the Mickey Mouse costume, or whatever was inside of it, stood there at the center of the room, its fake face just staring directly at me, as I mumbled no over and over and over. With shaking hands, violently thrashing heart, and legs that had once again turned to jelly, I managed to lift up the camera and aim at it, the opposite creature now quietly sizing me up. The digital camera's screen displayed only dead pixels in the shape of the thing. It was a perfect silhouette of the Mickey Mouse costume. As the camera moved in my unsteady hands, the dead pixels spread, marring the screen whenever Mickey's outline moved. Then my camera died. It went blank and quiet, and it was broken. I raised my eyes once again to the Mickey Mouse costume. "Hey," it said in a hushed, perverted, but perfectly executed Mickey Mouse voice. "Want to see my head come off?" It started to pull at his own head, working its clumsy, glove-clad fingers around his neck, with clawing, impatient movements similar to a wounded man trying to pull himself free of a predator's jaw. As it worked its digits into his neck, there was so much blood. There was so much thick, chunky, yellow blood. I turned away as I heard a sickening tearing of cloth and flesh. I only cared about getting away. Above the doorway of this room, I saw the foul message clawed into the metal with bone and fingernails. Abandoned by God. I never got the pictures out of the camera. I never wrote a blog entry about this. After I ran from the palace, I fled for my sanity, if not my very life. I knew why Disney didn't want anyone to know about this place. They didn't want anyone like me getting in, and they definitely didn't want anything like that getting out. So, that was Abandoned by Disney and or Abandoned by God, and that was written by Slime Beast, which I believe way back when. But yeah, hopefully y'all enjoy the creepypasta. I thought, hey, it is one of my favorite creepypastas, even though because I enjoy creepypastas when they take Disney, because honestly, I like Disney, but I also kind of hate Disney Corporation as well. So, any creepypastas that have Disney or like anything that kind of like dogs on Disney, I like it. But if y'all enjoy the creepypasta, that was the little Halloween video. Hopefully y'all have a good Halloween, and hopefully y'all enjoy the story. I've been posting a lot more, like this week of Halloween. So if you guys want to check out more creepypastas, I do have I've been posting every single day. So just go to the channel and check out the videos from before. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope y'all enjoy this little long creepypastas. And yeah, that was written by Slime Beast. And yeah, I don't have anything else to say. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and consider subscribing. You'll see some stuff pop up on the screen. Go check it out. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys later. Bye everyone.